Good morning, everybody. So today, we are going to be learning about the principles of design. On your Google Classroom, you should see the principles of design notes, which will be this. All right. You are going to take a note for each of these, and here we go. So the principles and patterns. When we talk about the principles, what I want you to think about is that over human culture, over the years, we have come up with things that we all agree look beautiful or look cool or look pleasing to the eye, right? So when we're talking about principles, these are essentially aesthetics, things that we as human beings have decided look good, how things are arranged to look good, okay? So earlier in the semester, we talked about the elements: line, shape and form, color, space, texture, and value. Um, and those are essentially essential parts of an image, right? You can't make a visual without them, right? So in this little thing here, there is always going to be some sort of line, say the grout between. There's always going to be some sort of shape, rectangle, right? Color, red and gray. Space, they're close, the bricks are closely packed together and they're running off the border of the square. Texture, it's rough, and value, the bricks are darker value than the grout. So those are always going to be in an image. The principles: balance, emphasis, movement, rhythm, contrast, and unity, are how those elements can be arranged. So same material here, brick, but the designer here has changed how those bricks are arranged so that there is some visual interest. I would say here that there's movement, there's contrast, and so on and so forth. So you can see that elements are those basic things that have to be here, whereas principles are sort of the aesthetics, how those can be arranged in pleasing ways. So again, those are the elements. Let's talk about principles. Balance is our first thing that human beings love. We have evolved over human history to appreciate symmetry because it's what's considered a fitness marker in evolution. So, like, you would find a mate who has good symmetry to their face is something that scientists theorize is how we choose beautiful people who we find attractive to have relationships with. That's because if you have a symmetrical face, you probably have a lot of genetic diversity in your background. All right. So actually, at this point, supermodels, who are people that our culture deems to be particularly beautiful, statistically have more symmetrical faces than your average person. All right. So we as human beings absolutely have developed to love symmetry and balance. So balance is the equal distribution of visual weight. So this is a painting where we expect symmetry, one side being reflected on the other because it's a human face, but he is actually some asymmetrically balanced. So where one eye is here, the other eye is up a little bit, but maybe it's weighed down by this triangle, right? So symmetry is about balance, whether it is symmetrical, perfectly reflected, or balanced by other means, which would be asymmetry. See how this is asymmetrically balanced. So, again, you should write down that there are three different types here. We have symmetric, which is reflected, and asymmetrical, which is balanced, so that one side is not perfectly reflected, but still has that visual weight distributed on each side. Oops. Let's go back there, sorry. So here we have the patterns that you can, some fabric patterns that are repeats. And you can see that this one, beautiful, has symmetry. The crane and everything is reflected left to right. Beautiful. So we've got some symmetry going on. Here we have, you can see that this is for reflected left to right, but also top to bottom. So this is what we call radial symmetry. We see this in starfish in nature, right? So another type of symmetry. And then here we have asymmetrical balance. These shapes over here, the rounded sort of star shapes, are balanced out by these lines over on this side, right? Not the same, but still balanced. Let's talk about emphasis. Emphasis is where our eye goes to first. So if you close your eyes and then open them and look at this painting, your eye probably goes to this. Some people go here as well, but most people go here. And there's reasons for that. This is our emphasis point. You can also call it a focal point. It's basically how we bring our eye to the most important thing on the page. So we can use elements, right? Those elements of art to bring our eye. How does it do this? One, size. This is the biggest thing on the page, right? Scale. So our eye wants to go to the biggest thing. It's light colored, right? So our eye wants to go to lighter or brighter colors first. So color, one of those elements, right? Line, so you can see our eye is dragged to this dot, this big circle, by diagonal lines pointing to it. All of these things create an emphasis or focal point where our eye wants to go first. All right, so here we have, again, color is making our eye goes to the cross, right? Whereas size and scale is making our eye go to the skulls. Also, this is being framed by these circles. So our emphasis point here is the skulls. Again, we have just an example of this design with an emphasis point and without. Our third principle is movement, all right? And with movement in fine art, it's not about physical movement, like about exercise or things like that, or running. It's about how a designer can move your eye through a piece. So how can they guide you through looking through a design? So in this example, we look at this line, right? And generally, we follow this line in a wavy pattern, but horizontally across this piece. And along the way, we're like, oh, hey, that sort of looks like a tree, looks like the sun is exploding, so on and so forth, right? So the movement of this painting is generally left to right, right? We are guided through this across. So movement, right? Again, we tend to follow lines. So you can see the movement to this fabric pattern is more vertical, but it's also got a waviness to it. So we follow these lines down. This one's direct down, right? Whereas this has a little bit more chaotic movement. We want to follow the waves around. All right? So this would be like a frenetic movement where we're following a little to the left and then over to the right and around and so on and so forth. So what we want is this sort of movement where we're being directed, What we don't want is this sort of movement. You can see there's people running, so like it's technically like the other definition of movement, but not for design, because there's no real path that my eye is supposed to go on. It's very disjointed. All right. So another principle of design that human beings have learned to really love is rhythm, which is very associated with repeats or patterns. All right. You can also see rhythms, of course, in music. That's where we mostly think about them. So rhythm is created by repeating or alternating elements, sometimes with defined intervals between, or defined gaps between them. So rhythm can create movement and establish patterns and textures. So I like to see this particular painting as a little bit of like a piece of music. In the background, we have one type of rhythm, an even rhythm, this sort of checkerboard, right? Think about that as the beat, right? It continues on, it's even, it's a regular rhythm. All right? So a regular pattern. On top of that, we have another rhythm, but this one is more erratic, right? These lines. Because we're repeating that lines over and over again, it creates a rhythm or a pattern, but there's different gaps of distance between them. They feel like they're going back and forward in space. So that rhythm is more like, say, the guitar solo, the melody on top of the song. All right, so you can see as long as we have repetition, we are going to have rhythm, and we can either have that be even or erratically spaced. Again, so we can see rhythm going this way. And then on here we have rhythm, diagonal rhythm, but also rhythm going this way, right? It's all about that repetition and alternation of space. All right, contrast is a cousin to emphasis. They go hand in hand, right? So if we played that game that we did before, and we close our eyes and open them, your eye is going to go to this like red rose sort of shape, all right? So when we talked about emphasis, we talked about like how color brings our eye to a certain area, but also contrast brings our eye to a certain area, right? Our eye is drawn to contrast, right? Contrast is the opposites, right? So putting two opposite elements right beside each other. So rough versus smooth, big versus small, bright versus dark. So you can see here, red and green are actually opposite colors in terms of color theory. So the fact that red is here, and green is in the background, that makes the red pop even more because they're opposites. The fact that this is big versus the things that are quite a bit smaller beside it. The fact that this is sort of like circular or rose versus the more simple geometric shapes around it, right? Those are contrasting, all right? So as long as you have something that is distinctly different in your page, your eye is going to be drawn to it. It gives pieces excitement and drama. So you can see contrast. We have a contrast in size and color that brings our eye to here. You can see that these elements, right? The color here, color is a big thing that is usually contrasted. So the yellows, the pinks, and the cyans contrast with the dark value of the background. Our final one today is the principle of unity. So unity is where we have everything fitting together. It's cohesiveness, the feeling of everything being in its place. So it's unity is almost the opposite of contrast, right? They rarely are seen together. But we like both, right? We like feelings of cohesiveness. So when we see unity, you'll see a lot of things being repeated or being similar. So for here, we have, this painting has a lot of repeating of the same shapes, right? So these sort of rectangular forms. We have repeating of a texture, so that entire texture is sort of that rough texture, and we're repeating colors. We have orange, greens, and blues repeated throughout. The fact that all of this is sort of repeated again and again through the piece makes it feel unified, like everything is fitting together. If I threw like a neon pink Santa clip art over in the corner, it would no longer be unified, right? So it's just repeating elements and making things cohesive. So a couple more fabric patterns. You can see we're reusing similar shapes and forms again and again. We have similar colors in both of these so that the thing feels cohesive. Repetition. All right. So, and there again, another unified design. So these are your principles of design. Make sure you fill out these. And when we are making patterns in the future, you are going to make sure that you are going to pick 3 of these principles, right? You could do unity, one with movement and one with contrast, right? And you're going to make sure that your patterns that you're making really show that individual principle, so that you're using design aesthetics that humanity has agreed looks really good. All right, off you go.